This is J. Krishnamurti's 7th discussion with teachers in Saanen, 1967.
This is the end of all discussions, talks, and I'm sure you're rather glad, so am I. I think we have more or less, during the talks and discussions and the educational gathering, we have more or less touched most of the problems of our modern existence, the problems that each one of us has. And I don't think any problem can be separated from other problems. All problems are related to each other. There is no isolated problem to be dealt with by itself. But when one begins to understand that one particular problem which one has, then perhaps in that very unrolling of that problem, we will see all the interrelated issues, problems. And the problems of youth, middle age and old age, I don't think they can be separated. I don't think the youth has special problems. I think they have, as they are beginning life, either they can lay a right foundation for a future life, or make a mess of their own life. And so, as they grow older, live in a state of confusion, conflict, and all the travail of life. And those of us who are a little older, we are already caught in the trap of responsibility, of children, of work, of all the miseries, sorrows. And of course, as we grow older, there's always that extraordinary issue, death. And I don't think any one of these problems, the problems of youth, middle age and old age, can be separated. We either make a mess of our life right from the beginning, and so are caught to the very end in a morass of problems, uncertainties, dissatisfactions and despairs. Or we can lay while we are very young, and I think that's the only time, perhaps, that a right foundation can be laid. I do not mean that the older people cannot completely break the trap in which they are caught. But it is much easier, it seems to me, when one is young, to begin to understand what extraordinary thing life is. Life isn't just merely sex, smoking pot, LSD, or going to the church or business, or making a name, or in despair throw up the whole thing and just lead a riotous, bohemian, uncertain, unclear life. I think life is something extraordinarily much more important. An issue much deeper, which requires a great deal of seriousness. And I think it's only when one is young, comparatively young, that one can sow the seeds of seriousness which will flower as one lives. But to sow those seeds of clarity, seriousness, and right behavior, one needs a careful observation, careful watchfulness, not only of things external. I'm afraid we can't let her have it, shall we? Where was I? You see, what I feel is, when one is young, one must be revolutionary. Not merely in revolt. That's fairly easy. To smoke, to have all kinds of sex and so on, so on, so on. That's comparatively easy. That's what everybody does. But to be really revolutionary, in the right sense of the word, not in the communist sense of the word, or the Chinese sense of that word, but psychologically to be revolutionary, which means non-acceptance of any pattern set by another or by oneself. No sense of conformity. No sense of accepting any form of authority, which means freedom from fear. And out of that freedom, one can live a totally different kind of life. Not a kind of life which the older generation have set, with their wars, with their comparative living, with their religions, their gods, saviors, priests, all that is old, dead, finished. But it seems to me, when one is young, instead of getting lost in so many absurd things, it is that period when one can, when one has not completely committed oneself to family, to a job, to all the miseries and activities. It is then, I feel, that one can begin to sow a seed that will really blossom throughout life. And that means really an action, a continuous action. And that continuous action can only take place if there is any kind of intensity, an urgency. Not the superficial urgency of some sexual satisfaction, or the urgency to conform to a particular useful pattern of existence. Take smoking, marijuana, the drugs, the various forms of abuse and indulgences, which does distort the mind. And as one grows older, these distortions become more distorted, more potent. And that's why it seems to me one should not only be aware of outward things, but also aware of the deep inward movement, the movement of wants, desires, pursuits, motives, the fears, the anxieties, to be aware of all that. So it's like ploughing a field and then sowing. But unfortunately, most of us are everlastingly ploughing, digging. But we never seem to sow. And the sowing is action. And that's action, if it is the outcome of a pattern, then that action is not only incomplete, but it does breed all kinds of problems, anxieties. I do not know if one has not noticed that when you do something completely with all your heart and mind, not with only the intellect, then such an action, a complete action, has neither a future nor a past. It is completed. And in that complete action, there's a great deal of beauty. And in that complete action, there is love. And that's what we miss in life. We don't know this action. An action which has neither the past nor the shadow of the future. It is action which is complete, immediate, urgent. And in that action, it's like a flame. It might bring about a tremendous revolution, outwardly as well as inwardly. I do not know if you have ever noticed how a river changes its course when it's blocked by a big rock. The whole river has taken a totally different direction. In the same way, if we could act in that sense which is complete, which is whole, which is not touched by environment, not touched by our inclination or tendency, then that action does bring about a different way of life. And after all, what we are concerned throughout these talks, and also the dialogue which one has with oneself tomorrow or in the next month, what we are concerned is with living, the daily, actual living. And in that living, there is so little beauty. In that living, there is never a complete action, and therefore there is no scent of that perfume which one may call love. Because most of us are so self-centered. All our activities are hedged about by this craving, which is the very center of our existence, which is the me. So, I feel if we could, after attending all these talks, discussions and so on, if we could be very simple with ourselves, and that's one of the most difficult things to be. Because we are never simple. Our minds are so complex. Our intellect has been so cultivated, sophisticated. It has innumerable reasons for not or for doing. And simplicity, not in garments, not living any old way with dirt, squalor, but simplicity of direct perception. To see something very clearly, and the very seeing of it is the acting. And that does bring about an extraordinary simplicity of action. I do not know if you have not noticed that when you do something without great deal of mentation, but you do something because you see it clearly, without any distortion. It is there, actually what is. And the very seeing of that and the doing of that does bring about an extraordinary sense of freedom. And without this freedom, not as an idea, but actually to be free inwardly. Without this freedom, I don't see quite how life, with its vast, complex problems, demands, activities, how all that can be understood. But unfortunately, most of us don't want to be free. Because freedom is a danger. Freedom is something that must be avoided. Or, when it is there, to be controlled, to be put in a cage. And that the mind does very well, very clearly how to trap freedom and hold it. So it seems to me that when we ask what are we to do in life, what am I to do when the world is so utterly insane, cruel, mad, brutal, violent? What am I living in this world? What am I to do? What is my relationship to the world? What am I to do when my son has to go to the army? And so on. We've got so many questions, which is a question of relationship. Me and the rest of the world. How am I to act in that relationship? That's a very serious problem. What am I to do? Most of us want to do some peripheral activity outside. We want to correct the world. There is violence, people are violent, the race riots, appalling things are happening throughout the world. We see that every day in every newspaper, every magazine. And we say, though I feel very strongly the necessity of being violent, of not being violent, I must somehow affect the world. I think one does. Tremendously affect the world if one, in oneself, is not violent. If one actually, every day, not as an idea, but every day live a peaceful life. A life which is not competitive, ambitious, envious. A life which doesn't create enmity. Then I, living in this world, having a relationship with this world, and in that relationship, the train. You see, what I am matters enormously. Because I have created this society. I have put this society together with my demands, with my prejudices, with my hatreds, with my religions, with my nationalism. I've divided, separated, made the world into fragments. And if I in myself am fragmented, broken, my relationship with the world also will be broken. My relationship with the world will have very little meaning. But if I do not function in fragments, but when I act completely, totally, then my relationship with the world has quite a different meaning. But you say, We want to be told what that relationship will be without oneself being. We want the image, the pattern of that relationship, of an individual who is free, whose action is complete. We want to know what that relationship will be through words, through image, through symbols. But the word, the symbol, is not the fact. And we are satisfied with the word, the explanation and the symbol. But if we, as human beings, brought into being in ourselves a non-fragmentary world in ourselves, then I think our relationship with the world undergoes a tremendous revolution. And after all, any movement that's worthwhile, any action that has deep significance must begin with each one of us. I must change first. I must, in my relationship with the world, see what is implied, what is the structure, the nature of this relationship. And in the very seeing of it is the doing. And therefore, I, as a human being living in this world, do bring about a different quality. And that quality, it seems to me, is the quality of a religious mind. I do not know if you have thought deeply into the matter or felt deeply, which is much better than thinking about it. If you have felt deeply what that word implies, the word religion, surely it is not the religion of organized belief and propaganda. The churches, the priests, the ceremonies, the ritual. That's not really religious religion. I feel religion is something entirely different. It has nothing to do with the invention of man through his fear. Religion is something that man has sought and has caught in the trap of organized religions. But to have a religious mind which is, to explain it is extraordinarily difficult because so many things are involved in it. To have actually a religious mind implies surely a state of mind in which there is no fear at all, and therefore no sense of security at any time. And a mind in which there is no belief whatsoever, but only what is, what actually is. And in that mind, there is a state of silence. Because I do not know if you have ever felt a complete sense of silence, which is not produced by thought, which is the outcome of great deal of awareness, attention. It is the outcome of meditation, in which the meditator is totally absent. Then out of that comes a silence. In that silence there is neither the observer nor the observed. And so one, in that state of silence, one begins to discover for oneself the origin, the beginning of thought. And then one discovers how thought is always the old, and therefore thought can never find anything new. And discovering all this out of this silence, which is part of that religious mind, one knows a state of energy which is not the energy of conflict, the energy that is engendered through striving, through envy, through ambition, through greed, through hatred. It's an energy that is untouched by any kind of conflict. And all that, it seems to me, is the state of religious mind. And without coming upon that, you may take LSD, have innumerable experiences, heightened sensitivity, visions. Or you might mesmerize yourselves through various dogmas and so on. But these sensations, visions, do not contain that religious quality. And as we said, what is important is that when one is young or old, it is now, in the present, that the whole process of one's life can be brought into a different level, to a different dimension. That's all, sirs. We want to discuss, or shall we call it quits? If there is nothing to discuss, it's 11 o'clock, let's stop, shall we? A nice morning, a whole morning to yourself. There is the river and the beauty of the sky. Is that enough, sirs? Right.